Okay, hi guys. So I want to share something that happened to me recently. So basically, somebody tried to recruit me into Amway, which is an MLM, a very famous MLM, in fact, one of the oldest, being founded in 1959. But this video is not talking about Amway because there are many other details talking about Amway's shady practices. What I want to share is a Zoom call I had with the Amway representative, and she shared this book by Robert Kiyosaki called The Business of the 21st Century, which is one of the worst books, in fact, that I have read. Uh, it's so bad that I decided to make a book review talking about this book. Uh, However, this book seems to have 3.9 out of 5 stars and 94% of people liking the book, which suggests that people think this book is good financial advice, even if it isn't. So I'll just share my summary of this book, The Business of the 21st Century. So this book was written in 2010 in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis where most people were losing their jobs. So it probably appealed to some people when Kiyosaki wrote about how risky and stupid having a job is and how having a job is for losers. And then he went on discussing his famous cash flow quadrant, which is not really a quadrant and more like four different types of income. Anyway, after talking about values and his so-called Maserati mindset, we reached the core message of this book, which is about network marketing, also known as multi-level marketing or MLMs. And the rest of his book goes on trying to convince people about the supposed eight assets that MLMs can provide them with. And finally, at the end of the book, persuading people to join an MLM. So as you might expect, there are many problems in this book. So I'll just share my thoughts on the individual chapters of the book before going through a summary of this book. So let's get started. Chapter 1: The Rules Have Changed. So Kiyosaki starts off with a discussion on how the 2008 financial crisis has enlightened the public on how risky jobs and pensions are, and it doesn't take long before Kiyosaki tries to claim credit for predicting the crisis. Already in page 4, he boldly writes, "I told you so," on the heading and quotes himself in 2001 saying, "In my opinion, the US and many Western nations have a financial disaster coming caused by our education system's failure to adequately provide a realistic financial education program for students." So let's examine the first part of his prophecy that there's a financial crash incoming. The concept of the business cycle was first theorized by the Swiss political economist Sismondi in 1819, where he tried to explain the periods of expansion and recession in economic activity. And this was further developed by Karl Marx and Henry George before being systematized in Keynesian economics in the 1930s, which theorized fluctuations in aggregate demand causing the business cycle. And furthermore, in US history, there have been a recession approximately once a decade, one in 1973 to 75, again in 81 to 82, 90 to 91, and 2001. So for Kiyosaki to predict that there's another recession will happen isn't a great insight, but actually a very normal thing to expect with a little knowledge of econs and history. And now for the second part of his prophecy, which is that the financial crisis will be caused by the education system failing to teach students about finance. Uh, in hindsight, this prediction is clearly false. The 2008 crisis wasn't caused by the educational system, it was caused by the failure of the housing market. And in fact, as a real estate investor, Kiyosaki helped fuel the 2000s housing bubble that caused the Great Recession when the housing bubble crashed in 2008, which uh, I'm surprised that Kiyosaki would include his wrong prediction in this book before deciding to congratulate himself on his supposed foresight. Anyway, that's the first chapter, and it's only gonna get worse from here. Chapter 2: The Silver Lining. Question: what do the Microsoft and Disney empires have in common? They were both launched during a recession, except that isn't true. Microsoft was founded in April 1975, right after the recession ended that year in March. Kiyosaki argues that a recession is a better time to start a business than during an economic upswing. According to him, during a recession, people get hungry, creative, and hence are more willing to start their own business. But this is disproven by empirical data. In the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, the number of new businesses created in the US fell from 715,000 in 2006 to 560,000 in 2010. And from 2008 to 2010, 1.8 million small businesses went bankrupt. Why is this so? During a recession, as people lose their jobs and purchasing power declines, households reduce their spending to cut costs. Less spending leads to less revenue for businesses, which means that it's harder for businesses to survive. There are also other factors such as pessimistic economic sentiments among people and banks, refusing to give out loans to businesses due to being on the verge of collapse. Anyway, the main point I want to make here is that business enthusiasm and drive does not compensate for the realities facing businesses during recessions. I feel that in this chapter, Kiyosaki is writing more like a motivational speaker than an economist or even a real businessman, emphasizing human qualities over real data and economic theory. And now, with his main point rebutted, I want to discuss some other things that he mentions in this chapter. In his section on the employment mythology, Kiyosaki claims that during the agrarian age, most people were entrepreneurs. The farmers worked the king's lands and paid a tax for the right to use the land. And I assume what Kiyosaki is trying to describe is feudalism in medieval Europe. Peasants in a feudal society were known as serfs, a word that is derived from the Latin servus, which means slave. There are many different classes of serfs, from villains to cotters to straight up slaves, but the common thread among them all is that they were indentured servants working for the lord of the manor, not the king, by the way, without any salary. Also, the lord of the manor had a lot of control over the serfs, such as choosing who they married and requiring that they fight his battles. Serfs did not pay a tax to use the lord's fields, rather, they worked the lord's fields for some part of the year, with the produce going to the lord in exchange for the protection of the lord. In the remaining parts of the year, they worked their own fields, which they could then sell the surplus on the market as profit. As you can see, serfs working on the lord's fields was not a form of rent where the serf pays for the use of the land for his own benefit, but instead a form of payment or service to the lord, where the serf works for the land for the benefit of the lord. And another point I want to highlight is that, contrary to what Kiyosaki wrote in this paragraph, the peasants were also not butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers. Those occupations were done by the usually wealthy merchant class, who were mostly separate from the feudal structure. And I feel that Kiyosaki romanticizes medieval peasants as supposed businessmen rather than employees too much, without giving much consideration to how they're just slightly better off than slaves. Anyhow, I understand that this is a book about business rather than a history of medieval European feudalism, but if Kiyosaki is gonna be so wrong about this, it's better for him to just delete this paragraph from his book entirely. And one last thing I want to say about this chapter: did you see this citation? A recent study found that most US voters view entrepreneurship as the key to solving the current economic crisis, to which I have a few questions. Source, date, percentage? Is there anything I can do to find out more about this survey? Because what, in general, Kiyosaki is breaking all the rules when it comes to citing a survey by not giving the readers any information about the survey. And I know it seems like a minor issue, but this sort of thing will really reduce the credibility of the book and of Kiyosaki himself. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's move on to chapter 3. Chapter 3. Where do you live? So here Kiyosaki references his famous cash flow quadrant: E for employee, S for self-employed or small business owner, B for business owner, and I for investor. As I already mentioned in the introduction, this isn't really a quadrant, just four different forms of money generation. Anyway, let's see what Kiyosaki has to say about them. Regarding the S quadrant, Kiyosaki writes, in a very real way, the S stands for slavery. Don't really own your business owns you. His reasoning is that people in the S quadrant are forced to work for themselves in order to earn money. But compare that with actual slavery, where people are forced to work for another person without earning any money in order to avoid being beaten up. Regardless, remember this quote. We'll get back to it in future chapters. Moving on to the B quadrant, Kiyosaki claims to have many B businesses, including my manufacturing business, my real estate business, mining companies, and others. I tried looking on the internet for his businesses that he references, but so far I haven't found anything. What I found was that Kiyosaki started a nylon Velcro wallet company called Rippers in 1977, which then fell apart and left him bankrupt. He then joined his competitors and brought the business back to life, but eventually it still ended up failing. I understand that it's not fair to accuse Kiyosaki of lying just because I can't find any online records of his many businesses, but I'm pretty confident that his supposed businesses did not have 500 employees or more, which he defined as a large business in the B quadrant. Adding to this confusion is that Kiyosaki almost never mentions his businesses, given that many people, including myself, will be interested in reading about what the names of these businesses are and how he built them up. Another statement that Kiyosaki makes, which I find strange: those who live and work in the B quadrant make themselves recession proof because they control the source of their own income. I don't understand what Kiyosaki is trying to say. Business owners' money comes from sales volume, which are definitely not controlled by them. During a recession, households reduce consumption, causing business revenue to fall, which might even lead to the business owner losing money. I feel that this sentence just wasn't thought through properly. Moving on to the I quadrant, where Kiyosaki writes, my rich dad taught me to live in the I quadrant by playing Monopoly. Four greenhouses, one red hotel, four greenhouses, one red hotel. I find it interesting that Kiyosaki mentions real estate as the only type of investment, despite the financial world having all sorts of investments such as stocks, bonds, options, ETFs, precious metals, oil, and many other financial derivatives. Diversification is one of the first lessons people learn in finance, not to put all their eggs in one basket. But Kiyosaki is implying otherwise by being fixated on real estate. In addition, I find his comment on investing not being rocket science as quite insulting. There are millions of people studying or working in the finance industry, and the finance has motivated rather sophisticated mathematical models and theories. As such, trivializing investment as simply buying houses is not the way to go. Okay, on to chapter 4. Chapter 4: Your core financial values. To summarize this chapter, the E quadrant values security, S quadrant values independence, the B quadrant values wealth building, and the I quadrant values financial freedom. In my opinion, there isn't much difference between valuing wealth building and financial freedom, which both focus on how people can make money without working. A few points I want to mention. First is that Kiyosaki writes that people in the S quadrant don't work too well with teams. They may even have a bit of an ego problem. Maybe he's right, but I feel that choosing to be self employed or starting a small business is not necessarily due to having poor social skills. There are small businesses that aspire to be big businesses and want more people to join them. It could also be due to a cost benefit analysis where people calculate that they can earn more being self employed than an employee. While Kiyosaki's statement might have an element of truth, I feel that it's too sweeping of a statement. Another oversimplification that Kiyosaki writes about is his claim that stock picking is merely gambling. There are a few key differences between picking stocks and gambling, such as investments in stocks generally having a positive expected value, and information about the company being useful in deciding which stocks to buy, with this information being dependent on the investor's skill in reading financial statements and interpreting statistics such as financial ratios. Anyway, I don't have much to say about this chapter, which means on to chapter 5. Chapter 5: The Mindset of an Entrepreneur. Kiyosaki starts off this chapter writing about how business students ask him how to raise money and find investors, to which his reply is, you just do it. You do it because you have to do it. If you don't, you're out of business. Which is good if the intent is to motivate the students, but he's not answering the question. They were asking how to raise money, not why they need to raise money. Next up, he says, even though I have enough money, all I do is raise capital, which raises the question, why? The main way that large businesses fund investment is through past profits. Raising capital requires either paying back the loan with interest in the case of debt financing, or selling off a part of your company in the case of equity financing. Using past profits is the easiest and best way to finance investment. And the reason why businesses raise capital is to fund investments that require more money than they have. Then, Kiyosaki says he raises money from employees, which doesn't make any sense. The businessman pays his employees to work for them, so shouldn't it be costing him money instead? Kiyosaki argues that employees create more value than what they're being paid for, but in terms of cash flow, which ironically Kiyosaki emphasizes a lot but seems to miss the point here, employees take money out of the business, while customers put money into the business. Kiyosaki then writes, if you have employees, your job is to get them to produce at least 10 times more money than what you pay them. As I mentioned earlier, Kiyosaki confuses the value of goods and services produced by employees with money. Employees don't produce money, they produce stuff that's bought by customers with money. But the main concern I have with this statement is the 10 times phrase. That's a crazy rate of exploitation. I know that businessmen do contribute to the economy by managing business operations, coming up with ideas and plans for the company, and growing the company while personally taking on the risk of the company failing in the case of sole proprietorships and partnerships. Also, I understand that it's just hyperbole and exaggeration, but to proudly boast and claim that the businessman should be earning a large multiple, not just of the employee's wage, but every employee's wage, is just being rude and arrogant. In another paragraph, Kiyosaki writes that one reason you want to create your business is to get your dignity back, implying that being an employee is undignified and something to be ashamed of. I think this shows the contempt for work and the working class in general, what he calls the E quadrant. If you want to read this book, watch out for this theme. It is an important thread throughout the entire book. Finally, in the last paragraph of this chapter, Kiyosaki explains what the mindset of an entrepreneur is. An entrepreneur is self determining, that is, they make decisions. Remember this when we reach part 2 of the book. Chapter 6: It's time to take control. The main summary of the chapter is that Kiyosaki is trying to convince the reader that all the alternatives to network marketing fail. First, he says, hard work will not make you rich, then starting a traditional business is too difficult, and franchising is too risky. Finally, he repeats his point that passive income is a must to become rich, and at long last, his recipe for wealth and financial freedom: network marketing. Okay, let's take a deeper look at his claims. Kiyosaki starts off with his paragraph heading, hard work will not make you rich. Why? According to Kiyosaki, it's because people who work for income work harder and harder, only to be taxed more and more. Forget working hard and making money. All you'll do is spend it, and then have to work hard all over again. Kiyosaki often attacks these two groups. First, the government, which only steals from people through taxes, and the working class, aka the E quadrant, who are so financially handicapped and short sighted that they have no ability to control their spending habits. Again, Kiyosaki's contempt for the working class is displayed. What does he omit? The privatization of social services, such as healthcare, that caused private profit maximizing companies to take over hospitals, and pharmaceutical companies which jacked up prices against the public good. The loosening of laws that protect workers' rights, and the dismantling of trade unions leading to workers being in a weaker position to fight for higher pay and better working conditions. Real estate speculators such as Kiyosaki that artificially increase demand for houses, pushing up prices and making them unaffordable for working class families. And last but not least, a culture of businessmen that are determined and take pride if they can pay their employees less than a tenth of the value of the goods or services they produce. Next up, Kiyosaki tries to discourage his readers from starting a traditional business, which is like a 180-degree turn from everything he has previously said in this book. He claims that today it costs an average of 5 million to start your own business. He doesn't cite any source as usual, so I looked up this online. According to a 2020 study by LendingTree using data from the Census Bureau, the average capital needed to start a business is 143,000 across all industries, with management of companies and enterprises ranking the highest at 440,000 and construction ranking the lowest at 67,000. None of these figures are even remotely close to the staggering 5 million mentioned by Kiyosaki. Also, contrast what he says here with what he says earlier in this very chapter. I often hear people say, it takes money to make money. That's BS. It might be too early to be making accusations now, but it seems that Kiyosaki is intentionally trying to mislead his readers into thinking that starting a traditional business requires way more money than it actually does, resulting in them giving up on their dreams of starting a legitimate business and instead following Kiyosaki's recommendation of joining an MLM. Then after this, he says, most people do not have the mental, emotional, physical, or financial stamina to handle these conditions. Contrast that with the previous chapter where Kiyosaki writes that, to me, being an entrepreneur is not that big of a deal. You just do it. It appears that after spending the past 5 chapters extolling the virtues of business and entrepreneurship, Kiyosaki realized that his readers might be inclined to start up a proper business and hastily wrote this paragraph in order to persuade them not to start a respectable company but instead join an MLM. Moving on, Kiyosaki writes that not all business will create passive income. If you own a restaurant, you earn income only when you prepare and sell a meal. If your business fixes air conditioners, you earn income only when you provide that service. Isn't this strange? Restaurant owners don't typically cook and serve food, they hire chefs and waiters. Similarly, the aircon business owner hires employees to fix the aircon. The businessman does not have to do the work in order to make money. Once again, contrast this with what Kiyosaki writes in chapter 4. An S quadrant investor thinks he has to do the property maintenance on his own, and a B quadrant investor will hire another company to do the maintenance for him. For someone who so proudly proclaims himself to be firmly in the B quadrant, Kiyosaki seems to have a rather S quadrant mindset in this paragraph. Another point I want to mention about Kiyosaki referencing a book he co-authored with Donald Trump titled We Want You to Be Rich. Kiyosaki writes that wealth is not a zero-sum game. It's not like if you become rich, then you're taking it away from anyone else. If you studied macroeconomics before, you might remember the formula GNI equals GDP plus net factor income from abroad, which means that the total income of everyone in a country is equal to the value of all goods and services produced in that country, adjusted for the net flow of money in or out of the country. Looking at this formula from a global scale, there's no net flow of money in and out of the world, and so global income must be equal to global product. That means that if there's a businessman earning income without producing goods or services, there must necessarily be workers who are not paid fully paid the value of the goods or service they produce, which in some sense is taking away the value of their labor. In fact, Kiyosaki boasted about this in chapter 5 with his famous 10 times quote. Of course, businessmen do actual work such as management, planning, and providing leadership, but in my opinion, the service that businessmen provide does not fully account for the many millions to billions that they get. My conclusion is still that workers are being shortchanged. Then, Kiyosaki claims that it's possible for every human being on this planet to be wealthy. How? Previously, Kiyosaki wrote that hard work in the E quadrant will never make people rich, but for businesses to function, they must have employees. Kiyosaki conveniently forgot about the need for the working class to exist in order to produce goods and services, instead, trying to sell an idea that everyone can become businessmen and rich, which is frankly not possible. Finally, we reach the end of part 1 with Kiyosaki introducing the term network marketing. If you think part 1 was bad, get ready, because the meat of the book is just starting. Chapter 7. My years in the business. Kiyosaki starts off this chapter by admitting that he had never really been in the business of network marketing, but he is an advocate for its business structure. He even claims that if he had to start from scratch, he would start a network marketing business instead of a traditional one. This starting paragraph already raises a few alarm bells. If network marketing is so profitable, why isn't Kiyosaki in one? He suggests that since he has already achieved his financial freedom, he is content just supporting network marketing from the sidelines. But I don't entirely buy that. Kiyosaki mentioned in chapter 5 that all he does is raise capital, implying that he's not done with business. Also, when I look at the richest businessmen such as Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, they're always looking for the next business opportunity, always hungry for growing their business empire. From what Kiyosaki is saying, I'm kind of getting the impression that he has some reservations about the network marketing business model, but he's not willing to share them in this book. Anyway, Kiyosaki goes on to describe MLM leaders as some of the most intelligent, kind, ethical, moral, spiritual, and professional people that I had met in all my years of business. Of course, Kiyosaki has the right to his opinion, but I feel calling MLM leaders the most ethical people is a bit of a stretch, considering the amount of controversies that MLMs have found themselves under. Next up, Kiyosaki talks to his friend, John Fleming, who was an executive for MLM company Avon, as well as a board member of the Direct Selling Association. The DSA was founded in 1910 as a trade group for door-to-door salesmen, but in recent years has been hijacked by MLM companies. In 1970, less than 5% of DSA companies were MLMs, while in 2018, more than 90% of them were MLMs. Basically, John Fleming is biased towards MLMs and has a vested interest in them, and thus cannot be fully trusted to present the MLM business model in a balanced manner. In the following transcript between Kiyosaki and Fleming, Fleming describes the business model of network marketing as such. People join the MLM as independent representatives and advertise the MLM's products via word of mouth. When people buy the MLM's products after being introduced to them by the representative earns a percentage of the sales revenue from the company. In addition, representatives can recruit other people to become representatives too, and when customers buy the MLM's products after being introduced to them by the new guys, the representative that recruited the new reps will also earn a percentage of the sales revenue. And this goes on for the recruits of the recruits and so on. But if you look deeper, you'll realize there's some problems with this business model. For example, if a rep from layer 10 sells a product and each layer gets a 10% commission, then the MLM itself will not be making any sales revenue. As the number of layers keep growing, the sales revenue for the MLM decreases as the number of reps they have to pay commission to increases. In reality, MLMs do not use the model that Fleming describes. Rather, the so-called independent representatives are the only ones allowed to buy products directly from the company. The reps are the ones making the sales, and when they sell to customers, their upline, which is the name for the guy that recruited them, and the guy that recruited the recruiter, and so on, takes a percentage of their sales revenue. So, Fleming describes MLMs as reps getting a cut of the sales revenue after advertising the company's products, while in real life, the upline, who are also the company's owners, gets a cut of the rep's sales revenue. So you can see that reality is a reversal of Fleming's description of the MLM business model. For someone like Fleming, who has been in the MLM business for a few decades, I find it quite unlikely that his description was just a careless mistake. It seems that he is trying to mislead the readers to make the business structure sound more legitimate and profitable than it actually is. Misleading claims and distortions is also one of the major themes in this book, especially when Kiyosaki and Fleming discuss MLM structure and benefits in this second part. Let's look at another one of Fleming's misleading claims. He quotes Kiyosaki saying that a B quadrant business has at least 500 employees, and while MLM reps don't hire employees, if they have 500 or more people in their downline, is what Fleming describes as so-called the same financial dynamic. Fleming implies that having many people, for example 500, in your downline puts you in the B quadrant, which is not true. Your downline doesn't work for you or the company, they work for themselves, selling products that they own with the additional component of you leeching off their sales. Contrast this with actual businesses, where the salespeople help to promote and sell the company's products and are compensated when customers buy the company's products. In reality, being an MLM puts you in the S quadrant, not the B quadrant, because you work for only yourself, with your upline leeching off part of your sales and you leeching off part of your downline sales. Remember that in chapter 3, Kiyosaki writes that, in a very real way, the S stands for slavery. As we look more into the MLM business model, I hope that I can convince you that joining an MLM has similar characteristics to being enslaved. One last thing I want to talk about is Kiyosaki deliberately targeting the poor and vulnerable for his MLM pitch. He writes about how poor people cannot get rich in the same way as Kiyosaki, which is to buy real estate, as they don't have the starting capital. So Kiyosaki uses that problem to pitch the MLM business model. You'll see more about MLM recruitment tactics in later chapters. Okay, on to chapter 8. Chapter 8 is not about income, it's about assets that generate income. Kiyosaki starts off this chapter with a discussion of assets and liabilities. Let's recap what they are before we hear from Kiyosaki. An asset is an item that you own that can provide future economic benefit. Liabilities are what you owe other parties. However, Kiyosaki writes that what defines something as an asset or liability is cash flow, not some extraction of value. This is obviously wrong, and Kiyosaki is confusing assets and liabilities with income and expenditure. But Kiyosaki doesn't seem to care that he's wrong, saying, forget the dictionary definition for a moment, and goes on to make very wrong conclusions based on his wrong definition. Kiyosaki writes, what is your house worth? Let me ask the same question in a different way. How much income does your house bring you, month in and month out? The same question? Those are two completely different questions. If you are renting out your house to a tenant, the answer to the first question could be something like 1.2 million, or the answer to the second question could be something like 8k a month. Kiyosaki is trying to make the unsophisticated claim that since your house doesn't bring in any money, it is not worth anything. By that definition, shares that do not pay out dividends, gold, and even paper money in the safe cannot be considered assets because they do not bring in any positive cash flow, which is just ridiculous. Then, Kiyosaki tries and fails to elaborate using an analogy. He writes, if you buy a piece of real estate for 100k and sell it for 200k, that's not an asset. You had to shoot the asset to get that money. You've killed the asset. It's like selling your cow for money. I'd rather own the cow and sell the milk. Expanding on his analogy, if you, the cow owner, decide to drink the cow's milk instead of selling it, suddenly, according to Kiyosaki, your cow is no longer an asset because money is not flowing in. But because Kiyosaki is hyper-fixated on the cash flow, he does not see the intrinsic value of staying in your house or drinking your cow's milk. When you drink your cow's milk, you save money that you would have spent on buying milk equivalent to the amount that you would have sold your cow's milk for. Similarly, when you stay in your own house, you save money that you would have spent on renting another identical house equivalent to the amount you rented your house for. That is worth something. Kiyosaki then writes that a job is not an asset, which, to be clear, is correct when considering the normal correct definition of an asset, but when using Kiyosaki's definition of assets being things that put money into your pocket, a job should be an asset. I think Kiyosaki chooses to ignore his own definition when it comes to a job as an asset. It's because of his hatred of the concept of having a job to the extent that he's blindsided by it. For him, a job cannot possibly be an asset because having a job sucks, and you have to work for money, which is unacceptable to him. I think that his real definition for an asset is something that brings in money periodically without you having to do anything. This definition will explain why Kiyosaki thinks that a job is not an asset. Anyway, the main reason why Kiyosaki gets into this very long discussion on assets is to make his point that an MLM network is an asset. But why? As Kiyosaki wrote when discussing about a job just a few lines before, you can't sell it on eBay, you can't rent it out, you can't take dividends from it. This also applies to your MLM network. You might think that the commission you get when your downline sells products is a dividend, but it's not. A dividend is a portion of a company's profits given to its shareholders because shareholders own a portion of the company. Contrast this with getting a commission when your downline sells, which is merely leeching off their work. Also, consider that there are two sides of the leech equation. You get to leech off your downline sales revenue, but when you make sales, you are getting leached off by your upline. This means that for your MLM network to be of any value, you must be leeching off more from your downlines than getting leached off by your upline. And remember that when you join an MLM, you have no downline and very many layers of upline, especially if you are joining an MLM that has been around for a while. Okay, enough about assets. Now for the crux of the whole book. I quote Kiyosaki. In network marketing, the whole point is not to sell a product, but to build a network, an army of people who are all representing the same product or service to share with others. There we go. Neither the selling aspect nor the product being sold are relevant, and what only matters is that you recruit others in order to make money from them. Can you think of a phrase that encapsulates that idea? Yes, it's a pyramid scheme. John Fleming expands more on the recruitment idea in chapter 13, so I challenge Fleming's and Kiyosaki's messages there. But the main takeaway is that network marketing, referral marketing, direct selling, MLMs, whatever you want to call them, are simply pyramid schemes that try to obfuscate and confuse people by having a front that appears to be about marketing and selling products in order to recruit more people into that pyramid scheme. Now, let's look at the supposed 8 assets that MLMs can provide and why Kiyosaki's claim about them is misleading. Chapter 9, Asset 1, A Real World Business Education. I have a confession to make. I'm a slow reader. What's more, I'm also a very poor writer. In fact, I failed writing twice in high school. Okay, Robert, no need to tell us, we already knew that. But jokes aside, Kiyosaki claims in the chapter that the most valuable asset from joining an MLM is not money, but a business education, where you learn the skills required to have a successful business. So, what are these skills? According to Kiyosaki, one of them is the ability to get organized and set your own agenda, such as setting goals, organizing a plan of action, managing your time, and executing a clear sequence of productive actions. Kiyosaki writes, it's shocking how many people do not have these basic skills. Shocking, but not surprising. After all, in the E quadrant, you don't really need them. Again, this theme of Kiyosaki's contempt for the working class is displayed. Working class people aren't just bots that only know how to follow orders. Employees also need to manage their time when given multiple assignments, make plans, and execute them efficiently in order for the company to grow. Outside of work, workers also need to plan and organize themselves at home. Cooking, cleaning, home repairs, and taking care of children all require some planning and organization. In work, usually the managers and businessmen are more involved in planning, but to say that the workers do not even have such skills is insulting. Next up, Kiyosaki writes that joining an MLM helps you pay less in tax, which supposedly teaches you life in the B quadrant. Lastly, John Fleming lists down some life skills that he thinks MLMs can teach, without elaborating on exactly how they can teach money management skills and investing skills. So, what's wrong with all of this? The main problem is that the skill set required to join an MLM is completely different from the skill set required to start a proper business. According to Harvard Business School, some of the key business skills required are understanding of economics, data analytics, financial accounting skills, and decision making skills. Contrast this with an MLM where you only do sales and recruitment, so the skills involved are very different, such as aggressive marketing, selling the idea of wealth and financial freedom, and hunting down and targeting the poor and vulnerable to make your sales pitch too. Another point I want to make, you remember Kiyosaki's conclusion in chapter 5, an entrepreneur is self-determining. When you join an MLM, you are not an independent business owner like what the MLMs claim. You must buy the products from the company, so you have no say in the quality of the products, the methods of production, logistics, and supply chain. You also don't have the ability to create your own brand separate from the company, and in some cases, you don't even get to choose the price you sell the products at. The point I'm trying to emphasize is that joining an MLM is completely different from starting a business. So you will not learn business skills relevant to legit businesses, but instead, all you'll learn is how to be an annoying salesperson and an annoying recruiter. Chapter 10, Asset 2, A Profitable Path of Personal Development. This chapter starts off with Kiyosaki asking Fleming, what is the number one reason that some people fail in network marketing? Fleming answers, the only way I believe people fail is to quit, followed by, The issue here is not about quitting the business, it's about quitting on yourself. Here we start to see the development of another major theme of MLMs in this book, which is regarding cult methods. Fleming tries to guilt trip his readers even before they have joined an MLM by saying that you are a failure if you quit. Kiyosaki goes even further. He writes, "How do you know when the loser is speaking up? Oh, I can't afford that. Oh, that's too risky. Or, what if I fail?" The winner's up for the risk, but the loser thinks only of safety and security. Kiyosaki calls any form of critical thinking or hesitation to join an MLM as being a loser. Another display of cult techniques. Kiyosaki tries to emotionally manipulate and deceive his readers to join MLMs, then proceeds to shame them if they think about quitting. Another thing I want to mention is Kiyosaki's inability to quantify risk. When we think about risk, we think about expected value, value at risk, variances, covariances, and so on, which are all numbers. But for Kiyosaki, he sees risk as a dichotomy, whether something is risky or risk free. He writes that having a job and putting your savings in a mutual fund is also risky, just like joining an MLM. Hence, any discussion about risk just makes you a loser. But of course, the minimal risk of mutual funds is nothing compared to the near certainty of financial losses in joining an MLM. Kiyosaki ends this chapter with what he thinks is a romantic story and what I think is creepy. He writes about how he started dating his wife, Kim Kiyosaki. He asks her out, she says no, and he refuses to accept no as an answer. So he kept asking her out again and again for 6 months until she finally said yes. Kiyosaki shows that he's a person that cannot accept the fact that no means no, and will not stop hounding and disturbing people until he gets his way. His story is a preview to what you will be doing if you join an MLM, to constantly harass friends, family, even strangers to buy your products or to be recruited into the MLM. The so-called personal development that Kiyosaki writes about in this chapter is to prime you to suppress critical thought as being a quote loser mindset and then turning you into an insufferable salesperson and recruiter. Chapter 11, Asset 3, a circle of friends who share your dreams and values. Here, the cult theme becomes more prominent as Kiyosaki tries to convince his readers to sever ties with their old friends and make new friends within the MLM. This causes you to get sucked more deeply into the MLM system and makes it harder for you to get out. Kiyosaki writes, "The friends you hang out with right now might be holding you down, suggesting that they are a burden that should be gotten rid of." Then Kiyosaki writes, "You may have friends that tell you you're nuts, you're a sucker, or you're making a huge mistake. You may even lose friends." Kiyosaki urges you, the reader, to ignore the warnings given by your friends and family, to trust people that are out there to steal your money, rather than those that have your best interests at heart. And what do you gain when you join one of these MLMs? You lose your friends, and in return, you make these so called friends that profit off you when you make sales, and thus drive you to your limit to make sales, pressuring you to surrender everything else in your life and make the MLM the only thing in your life. These cult tactics used by MLMs must be called out. They try to cut you out from your old social circle, prevent outside information from coming in, suck you into their ecosystem until it becomes the only thing that matters in your life. It destroys genuine relationships for parasitic ones, and soon enough, the only people you have in your life will be the people inside the MLM, which then makes it extremely difficult to leave. So, if you decide to join an MLM, know that these friends that share your dreams and values of being rich, attaining financial freedom, or being independent are all trying to achieve that in one way by exploiting you and everyone below them. Chapter 12, Asset 4, The Power of Your Own Network. Kiyosaki describes the power of traditional networks in this chapter and attempts to relate them to MLM networks. He writes about Sam Walton, Bill Gates, and Jeff Bezos becoming billionaires by building networks, Walmart for its many networks with suppliers, Microsoft for Windows OS that allowed computers to communicate with one another, and Amazon in terms of its logistics and distribution network. But the main problem with this argument is the pyramidal network of MLMs bears no resemblance to the normal network web seen in legit companies. Let's look at Kiyosaki's understanding of Metcalfe's law. Metcalfe theorized that the value of a network is equal to the number of users squared. According to Kiyosaki, the economic value of a network goes up exponentially, not numerically, by which I assume the words he meant were quadratically and linearly. If you look at a normal network where every user is connected to every other user, you could say that the number of links is n times n minus 1 over 2, which in some vague sense means that the yet undefined value of a network is of the order of n squared. But this is not how MLMs are structured. In an MLM, you are only connected to your upline and your downline, which already leaves out many people in the company. Worse still, not all connections bring a positive value to you. Your downline connections are certainly positive since you can leech off their sales, but your upline leeches off your sales, so the connection there is decidedly negative. In fact, we can form an equation that describes the value of an MLM network. So the value of an MLM can be given by this formula pi equals to S plus V, where pi is the total profit, S will be the sales profit without an MLM, which is the profit that you would get if you made the number of sales but without being in an MLM. And V is what I would call the value of an MLM. So if V is more than zero, you would stay in the MLM. But if V is less than zero, you would leave the MLM because you can make more money by leaving the MLM and just selling the goods by yourself. So this is how an MLM pyramidal structure looks like. You have your upline, and after a while, you will also get your downline. So the formula for V will be the sum that you can leech from your downline minus the sum that you get leached off by your upline. But the important thing to see is this, that the sum of everyone's value will be equal to zero because money is only going from the downline to the upline. There's no net gain or loss of money from outside the system when it comes to studying the value of V. So there must always be losers in an MLM, which will be the people at the bottom, while the people at the top will be the one exploiting the system. So that is how I analyze the value of an MLM. Kiyosaki then goes on describing how franchisees work and how joining an MLM is like a personal franchise. There are, of course, a few key differences. Franchises only have two layers between the franchisor and the franchisee. The franchisee does not have the right to sell the business model and brand name to other franchisees. As such, franchisees are designed to be profitable only through their sales, while MLMs can only be profitable through constant recruitment. Also, franchisees buy the brand recognition, trade secrets, and business structure from the franchisor, while in MLMs, the downline merely buys the product, since brand recognition is usually a negative given all the controversies, and there is no business model to speak of besides the pyramidal structure. Lastly, Kiyosaki writes, network marketing businesses are genuine information age businesses because they deal not with land and materials but with pure information. Then he writes, as a network marketer, you might think your job is to demonstrate and sell a product. It's not. Your job is to communicate information, to tell a great story, and build a network. Now, when the shimmering veil is lifted and the smoke is cleared, we can see MLMs for what they truly are. They are pyramid schemes. The only thing that matters is recruitment, and the product is irrelevant, merely a front to distract people by giving the illusion that it is a business. Kiyosaki even includes a picture of the pyramid structure of MLMs in this chapter. By trying to explain the MLM model, Kiyosaki inadvertently exposed it for what it truly is, a scam. Chapter 13, Asset 5, a duplicable, fully scalable business. Here, the idea of MLMs being profitable from recruiting rather than selling products is expanded on. Fleming writes, to succeed in network marketing, often the first thing he or she has to do is forget everything they know about selling. And then, if you are an amazing, uniquely skilled, superstar salesperson, then you can do great in sales, and chances are good you will do lousy in network marketing. A few more paragraphs elaborating on how the purpose of MLMs is not selling but recruiting, and we get to Kiyosaki's idea of scalability. Even though Kiyosaki describes MLMs as being infinitely scalable, they are clearly not. If everyone in an MLM recruited 3 people as their immediate downline, the 22nd layer will theoretically have 10.5 billion people, more than the total population on Earth. And that's how MLMs collapse. The 21st layer realizes that there'll be no one left to recruit and hence will quit. The 20th layer now has no downline, so they will also quit. And the same line of reasoning applies to the 19th layer and above until the whole pyramid collapses from the bottom up. That's why MLMs rely on a constant stream of new recruits unaware of the company's shady practices to compensate for those who leave, leading to very high turnover. Next, Fleming discusses presentation tools as a recruitment device, which allows more MLM members to recruit new people more effectively, which also means you have to pay more money to buy these CDs, DVDs, or other online materials, and these MLM companies earn more money from selling these products to you. This chapter is basically a repeat of the previous chapter. Don't focus on selling, focus on recruiting. It should be increasingly obvious that this is a pyramid scheme, and the product is merely there to disguise its true nature, and that the only purpose of recruiting others is so that they can recruit others, and so on. One final thing that I'd like to point out in this chapter. Fleming writes, you network. That's why it's called network marketing, and that's why the company needs you, and why they pay you. The company does not pay you. You can only earn money by leeching off your downline sales. That's the key difference between being in a normal business and being in an MLM. You don't earn money, you just steal from those below you. Chapter 14, Asset 6, Incomparable Leadership Skills. Kiyosaki now describes network marketers as the best storytellers, leaders who can speak directly to spirit and inspire others to go for their dreams. But this contradicts what he wrote about in the previous chapter. In chapter 13, Kiyosaki writes, you don't have to be a top salesperson and you don't have to be an expert speaker or presenter. In fact, Kiyosaki's whole section on scalability is about how you don't have to be good in communication and persuasion because the company will have its presentation materials for you to just give out and tell them to look at it. Next, Kiyosaki talks about the 4 elements of leadership, suspiciously structured in the form of a pyramid. At first, it doesn't make any sense what spiritual leadership has to do with MLMs, but looking deeper, we find that the common place for MLM recruitment is in churches, where church members are more trusting and open to hearing from other members. Anyway, the paragraph that I want to focus for on this chapter is this. I began to realize that a network marketing business is based on the leaders pulling people up, while a traditional corporate or government business is based on promoting only a few and keeping the masses of employees content with a steady paycheck. These instructors in the network marketing world were not saying, if you don't perform, you lose your job. Instead, they were saying, let me help you do better and better. As long as you want to learn, I'll be here to teach you. We're on the same team. I want to discuss the difference between normal businesses and MLMs because some people accuse normal businesses of having a pyramid structure and hence they argue there's nothing wrong with MLMs looking like a pyramid scheme. In a normal business, everyone, from the CEO to the newest intern, is an employee, or as Kiyosaki calls it, in the E quadrant. Then who are the business owners? They're the shareholders of the company, who get a vote for every share that they own to elect the board of directors, who then appoints the CEO. All members of the company get paid a fixed salary, with bonuses tied to their performance, not to the number of people that they recruited. And in this structure, orders go down and reports go up, so the pyramidal shape is due to the chain of command. Now, for MLMs, the business owner is at the top of the pyramid, while everyone else is in the so-called S quadrant. As I mentioned some chapters ago, they are not in the B quadrant. And in this system, money goes from the bottom to the top, while what Kiyosaki and MLM companies describe as mentorship and personal development go down. I prefer to use the terms bullying and harassment. Your upline wants to see you succeed in sales and recruiting others. That is true. What is typically not realized until people get themselves in an MLM company is that selling and recruitment are the only thing that the upline cares about. Your upline doesn't want you to engage in unproductive stuff like spending time with your old friends and family, engaging with your hobbies, or getting a decent amount of sleep. Your upline wants to turn you into a selling machine, a zombie that just makes sales and gets milked by them at the expense of your well being. If they think that you are not putting enough effort in the MLM, they will constantly pressure you and stress you out in order to get you to sell and recruit more. Then they'll give you some terrible financial advice, like selling your car in order to buy more of the company's products, self help books, or attending seminars. It's not just a financial scam. MLMs also alienate you from your family and friends, waste your time with the company's events, damage your mental and emotional health, makes you hated throughout your community for aggressively trying to pitch the MLM, and then scams you of your money. Anyway, perhaps this sort of very aggressive methods used to pressure and guilt trip your downline can be considered as leadership skills by Kiyosaki. But for me, I cannot see how this sort of leadership style, in order to scam people, can be considered ethical at all. And this is definitely not the type of leader that I would want to be. Chapter 15, Asset 7, A Mechanism for Genuine Wealth Creation. Kiyosaki describes his four-step path towards financial freedom, which is 1. Build a business, 2. Reinvest in your business, 3. Invest in real estate, and 4. Let your assets buy luxuries. Kiyosaki doesn't write much about MLMs in this chapter, only suggesting that since joining an MLM is like owning a business, it helps with step 1 of his four-step path. Again, I want to reiterate that joining an MLM does not put you in the B quadrant, only the S quadrant. You have the additional problem of getting leached by your upline. Also, I already mentioned how Kiyosaki fails to diversify his investments, putting them all into real estate, which is pretty bad financial advice, especially when considering the context of this book, which was written right after the 2008 financial crisis caused by the collapse of the real estate market. Most issues in this chapter have already been discussed in the previous chapters, so it's on to the last asset Kiyosaki writes about, dreams. Chapter 16, Asset 8, Big Dreams and the Capacity to Live Them. Kiyosaki spends this chapter discussing the types of people that have dreams, arguing that joining an MLM is the way to go in order to dream big, achieve those dreams, and go on to dream even bigger dreams. Again, Kiyosaki criticizes risk aversion in this chapter, calling them dream killing words. Of course, the main problem with his line of argument is that MLMs do not provide you with sufficient money in order to live your dreams. According to the FTC, 99.6% of people in MLMs lose money, but if you do not join an MLM in its initial days, that percentage jumps up to 100% because only the guys at the top of the pyramid can ever be profitable. Compare that to a 39% success rate for small businesses and, surprisingly, a 10% success rate for straight up illegal pyramid schemes. That's probably because illegal pyramid schemes don't have a product to hide behind, and so members of a pyramid scheme don't waste money buying any overpriced products. The same study also found that the average net income after subtracting expenses for the 200 top Amway distributors in Wisconsin was approximately minus $900. So these are the facts. MLMs are scams and you can't make money from them. Whatever your dreams are, just be aware that joining an MLM is never the way to achieve those dreams. Now that we have looked at all 8 of the supposed assets that Kiyosaki claims joining an MLM can provide, let's look at them as a whole. Firstly, most of them aren't even assets, neither from the normal definition nor even by Kiyosaki's definition. None of them can be sold for money, and the only thing generating anything resembling passive income is your downline when they make sales. And what Kiyosaki fails to write about are the whole load of liabilities that you get when you join an MLM, such as the cost of buying inventory, the opportunity cost of the many useless conferences, the money spent on buying self-help books and promotional material from the MLM company, and more. And that's before considering the fact that MLMs actually don't provide what's promised by Kiyosaki in the chapter titles. MLMs don't provide a real business education, don't help in personal development, all your new friends will be cons, you don't own the network, the business cannot be scaled infinitely, you don't become a respectable leader, you cannot create any meaningful income, and you cannot live your dreams. Okay, I hope I've convinced you. Time for the last chapter of this part. Chapter 17, A Business Where Women Excel. And now, We get to hear from Robert Kiyosaki's wife, Kim Kiyosaki. She makes her sales pitch directly to women as a target demographic. According to her, women make up 80% of MLM members. Why? No need to speculate. We have the data already given to us by her. Women are poorer than men, live longer than men, and as such, have to provide for themselves after their husband dies, and are in some instances financially dependent on their husbands. Also, some women as housewives have more free time than men, and tend to have more connections to recruit or sell products to. What all this suggests is that women are more vulnerable to MLM scams. They are more likely to be taken in when someone suggests the idea of financial freedom and wealth generation, only to lose all the money that they put into the MLM, and also losing all their friends after harassing them to join the MLM. And it's not just women. Other vulnerable groups include young people before they find their first job, retirees, ethnic minorities, poor people, and students. This theme of MLMs exploiting the vulnerable isn't just in this chapter. The whole book also targets people who recently lost their jobs. This book was published in 2010 at the peak of the US unemployment rate, and the whole first part of the book repeatedly writes about the uncertainties behind having a job. To summarize, the MLM marketing strategy is to prey on those who are already weak and vulnerable because they're less likely to fight back against this scam. Finally, we have gone through part 2. Time for the last few chapters in this terrible book. Chapter 18. Choose Wisely. Kiyosaki discusses a few criteria on how to choose which MLM to join, which are whether they provide a business education, leadership, plan of action, personal development, quality of product, and others. But as you know by now, the only wise choice to make with regards to MLMs is not to join in the first place. It's not about any of the factors that Kiyosaki mentions. The problem is with the MLM business model in the first place. By writing this chapter, Kiyosaki attempts to put the blame on the individual if they lose their money in MLMs. Oh, you joined a bad MLM, that's why you failed. Join this other MLM instead. And people can get scammed again and again by MLMs because they think that the problem is because they chose the wrong MLM rather than the reality that the whole MLM business model is a scam. Choose wisely, don't join an MLM. Chapter 19. What it takes. Kiyosaki writes that the path to succeeding in MLMs is the right attitude, which means not quitting the MLM according to him. Also, he writes that it takes time, suggesting trying it out for at least 5 years. Kiyosaki gives the example of the Chinese fortune cookie that says, "You can always quit. Why start now?" Of course, this reasoning is flawed. If you are losing money every day from being in an MLM, the earlier you quit, the less money you will lose, providing more than enough reason to quit earlier. The same bad argument can be used in abusive relationships or drug addictions where someone argues that since you can quit anytime, you shouldn't quit now, which in the end leads to you not quitting at all. Also, this theme of blaming the individual for failure continues in this chapter. It's like Kiyosaki is saying, if you fail, you just didn't put in enough effort, you had the wrong mindset, you didn't wait long enough. It's not your fault when you fail in MLM, because the whole design of an MLM is that the ones at the top leech off the ones at the bottom. In a normal business, with hard work, knowledge, understanding, perseverance, and luck, it is very possible to be successful. But for an MLM, as long as you join them, you will fail. The only factor that matters in whether you succeed in an MLM is where you are on that pyramid. What it takes is being at the top. If you're not at the top, you will fail. Chapter 20. Living the Life. Kiyosaki writes that joining an MLM and building wealth will lead to a magnificent life where you don't have to work. He discusses 3 different emotional states that he thinks correspond to 3 financial states. Being poor and unemployed makes you live in fear, being employed makes you live in anger and frustration, and being rich makes you live in joy, peace, and contentment. This is an overgeneralization. Many workers actually do enjoy their work and find meaning in it, while many rich people have their own set of struggles and emotional problems. But that's not the main problem. The main problem is that MLMs cannot build wealth. You will only lose money from joining an MLM. So, anything Kiyosaki writes about protecting, budgeting, or leveraging your money becomes irrelevant because you lost all your money after joining an MLM. Being rich is only one of the many factors that allow people to live in joy and peace. But Kiyosaki's idea of joining an MLM does not even allow you to meet that criteria. So, at the end of the day, it will not work, and you'll just be living in anger after losing all your money to an MLM scam. Chapter 21: The Business of the 21st Century. This is the last chapter. 21 chapters for the book about the business of the 21st century. And here we are, where the chapter title is the same as the book title. We've gone full circle discussing the scam that is the MLM business model. How does Kiyosaki end this book? By writing about how MLMs allow for democratic wealth building and an economic foundation for peace, which is pretty high minded for what is essentially a pyramid scheme. Kiyosaki thinks that because anyone can join an MLM regardless of race, sex, or educational background, it is fair and democratic. But giving everyone the opportunity to get scammed by MLMs is not democratic. In fact, money flows from the bottom to the top of a pyramid in an MLM, compared to democratic societies where money tends to flow from the top down. Then, Kiyosaki concludes his whole book by writing about how MLMs can bring about world peace, the complete opposite of what it actually does. MLMs ruin relationships, sow discord, and only lead to financial ruin. And finally, a call to action to join an MLM. What an awful book. About this book, to truly understand a piece of literature, we have to consider its PACC: purpose, audience, context, and culture. The purpose of this book is obvious: to persuade readers to join an MLM. The audience are vulnerable groups, such as women, the poor, unemployed people, ethnic minorities, retirees, students, and so on. The culture is American capitalism in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. But the most important aspect is the context, and it boils down to this question: who is Robert Kiyosaki? In 1997, Robert Kiyosaki was a virtually unknown man who had recently self published his book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. His book wasn't garnering much attention, just another financial advice book in a sea of such books and seminars. But his fortune would completely change just 3 years later. In 2000, Warner Business Books published his book, and suddenly sales skyrocketed and propelled Kiyosaki to fame. However, after some time, readers questioned the apparent contradictions in Kiyosaki's account of his rich dad in the book. Kiyosaki finally admitted in 2003 that there was never really a rich dad, and it was more like what he describes as a myth, like Harry Potter. Kiyosaki used his newfound fame as the leading financial guru to sell his financial courses, which cost 45,000 for the highest tier of his personal finance class. Kiyosaki also went on to write many more books on personal finance, including The Business of the 21st Century in 2010. In 2012, Kiyosaki's personal finance company, Rich Global LLC, filed for bankruptcy after being sued for failing to pay a percentage of profits from his speaking engagements to another company called The Learning Annex. At that point, Rich Global LLC had assets worth $1.8 million dollars and liabilities worth nearly $26 million. Dollars. Kiyosaki continues to write books, give speeches, and sell personal finance courses. But even after this background information, there's still some questions. What was Kiyosaki doing before 1997? And how did Rich Dad Poor Dad catapult into success, seemingly out of nowhere? In Chapter 6 of The Business of the 21st Century, Kiyosaki writes about how he and his wife went from being homeless and living in their car in 1985 to becoming millionaires in 1989. However, Kiyosaki does not provide any evidence of this ever happening. In fact, before 1997, Kiyosaki never had any proof of the wealth that he supposedly had. His wealth did not come from manufacturing, real estate, mining, or any of those. Instead, it's more likely that he lied about his wealth initially to sell his courses, which then allowed him to genuinely become rich. Now, for his sudden success in 2000. In the mid 1980s, after Kiyosaki's Velcro wallet company collapsed, he joined Amway under Bill Galvin, a diamond level sales leader under the Dexter Yeager organization in Amway, which is quite a revelation after considering that in Chapter 8, Kiyosaki writes that he had never been in the business of network marketing. Anyway, In 1997, Kiyosaki was struggling to get Rich Dad Poor Dad published by a publishing company and distributed. Then, Galvin discovered his book at a car wash in Houston and distributed the book to the so-called leaders of Amway. Those leaders saw the potential of his book as recruitment material and contacted Kiyosaki to buy more. The leaders then sold many copies of Kiyosaki's book to their downline, and the downline gave his book out to potential new recruits to Amway. This proved to be a rather successful technique to convince people to join MLMs, and so other MLMs picked up on the book and spreaded it through their companies as well. As such, sales of Rich Dad Poor Dad eventually reached critical mass and went onto the bestseller list in 2000. Looking at the acknowledgement page of Rich Dad Poor Dad, we can find Bill Galvin's name in there, and if you search the names of this list online, you'll find that many of them are high-level Amway members. Kiyosaki wasn't just a member of Amway as a side hustle, he was a big shot in Amway. All the way back in the 1990s, Amway made motivational cassette tapes that they sold to their downlines, and if you look at the list, Kiyosaki is one of the speakers. In 2000, there was an Amway, also known as Quickstar during that period, conference, at which Kiyosaki was a key speaker. He promoted MLMs and recommended complete dedication to building the Amway pyramid. There's even a YouTube video online of Kiyosaki at an Amway conference talking about Bill Galvin as his upline and his meeting with Dexter Yeager. So the point I'm trying to make is that Kiyosaki has very strong connections to Amway, which will affect how we understand this book, The Business of the 21st Century. A Faustian bargain. In the classic German legend, the scholar Faust makes a deal with the demon Mephistopheles. The demon would serve Faust with his magic powers for a certain number of years, but at the end of the term, the devil would claim Faust's soul. This is where the phrase deal with the devil comes from, and it's how I perceive Kiyosaki's book, The Business of the 21st Century. For Rich Dad Poor Dad was good recruitment material for MLMs, given the themes of criticizing employment and praising business as the path to financial freedom. That book did not explicitly recommend joining an MLM. So what I think happened was that Amway or another MLM suggested that Kiyosaki write another book that is even more explicit in terms of its promotion of MLMs. Kiyosaki would benefit from more book sales and possibly more people signing up for his personal finance courses, and the MLMs would have better recruitment material, leading to more people joining the MLM, all at the expense of the people who joined the MLMs after reading Kiyosaki's book, only to get their lives ruined by the MLM company. I call the business of the 21st century a deal with the devil, because in exchange for wealth and fame, Kiyosaki has compromised on his morals by using his status as a financial guru to con people into joining MLMs. Kiyosaki is a veteran of Amway. He knows the business model of the company, and he has seen people's lives being destroyed by Amway. And yet, he sells out his morals in order to promote MLMs in his book, and then lies by writing that he never had any direct involvement with MLMs. So yes, that is what I think of Robert Kiyosaki's The Business of the 21st Century. Thanks for watching.